You're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. It's time for British Wrestling's sharpshooter, your host, Stu Palmer.
A warm welcome to episode 28. My guest today is the superstar and the megastar of NWA Power, Tim Storm, the former NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Tim is a school teacher for his day job, so it's interesting to see how the challenges of that have been for him with technology and getting the students taught. He teaches history, so yeah, we start off with that, and then we go into his career, how he began watching wrestling many years ago, some of the guys that he loved watching as a kid. We also talked about his career as NWA World Heavyweight Champion. We even got on to talk about Momma Storm and how his promos were influenced by Momma Storm, and it took the industry by storm, might I add. We also talk about Tim's shows that he did at Joe Exotic's park, and there was a couple of them and some great stories about Joe Exotic, who Tim knows really well. So here we are, episode 28, striking while the iron's hot. It's the NWA Power superstar, megastar, Tim Storm. Enjoy. Right, my guest for Stu's Wrestling Podcast this week is the NWA Power superstar and the former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Tim Storm.
Stu, it's a pleasure. Thank you for for taking the time. But the way I look at all of this is as far as wrestling, we're all in this together. We're all in this to make each other successful. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Now, Tim, you're a school teacher. How's it been recently, logistically for you, getting the kids taught and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a challenge for me personally. I think my strength or my gift as a teacher is standing up and teaching, right? Telling stories. I think I'm a history teacher. So, history is not always interesting. So when you stand up, it's your job to try to engage them and get them locked into what you're talking about. And if you're a good storyteller, that helps. Today, with where we're at in quarantine, it's all online. There's very little personal, interaction. And from our standpoint, we have to keep in mind that every situation for those students is different. It could be, again, I'm speculating, but it could be they're in an apartment with three other, school age kids and a parent who's working from home with one computer and limited Wi-Fi. And how do you reach all of those people and provide? So it's a challenge. And personally, for me, technology, not my strength. But again, I've managed. I've got with help. I've kind of hit a groove with it. We're on our 7th week, I think, of quarantine.
Yeah.
So for us here, time-wise, we have about 3.5 weeks of school left to help them and get them prepared, and at least hopefully get them to move forward to the next grade. I teach 13 and 14-year-olds. I teach 8th grade here.
It's a crucial time for them as well, I guess, the age and what they're doing. Yeah. My sister's in the same boat. She teaches pre-primary here in the UK, 5 and 6-year-olds, and obviously she's having the same things that you're having with the technology. I think that, it's cool that you're managing to do what you can do for them. Right, Tim, where were you born? That's going to be the first question before we hit any of the wrestling talk.
I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So since you're in the UK, some people may or may not be familiar. Arkansas is in the South. And within Arkansas, the capital is Little Rock, and Pine Bluff is about an hour south of Little Rock. Arkansas is a beautiful state. Matter of fact, it's called the natural state. So lots of trees and green and lakes and rivers. I mean, it's a beautiful place. Pine Bluff, not such a beautiful place. We have famous for the paper mill, which means it smells like death most of the time. There was at one point a site that possibly housed weaponry. So we had, it was an interesting place to grow up. And I would say as far as people from what would consider a big city, it was not a huge city. I think we were 30 or 40,000 people, which, it's depending on where you're from, right? I mean, if you're in New York, that's a tiny city. Yeah. If you're from a small country town, that's a pretty large city. So, but centrally located in the South. And unfortunately, over the last 10 or 15 years, it's been rated one of the worst places in the United States to live, just, because of things that crime rate and those kind of issues, not offering theater and things like that. But at the time, it was a good place to grow up. It was a good place for me.
How was your upbringing?
My mom, who is by accident has gotten some notoriety, some positive fame, is a role model, somebody who is my hero. My dad had a lot of issues growing up as far as, he had a stroke when I was 11 and really was never able to work again, and kind of became, much to his dissatisfaction, kind of a home father, where he was doing the cooking and those kind of things. And like my dad, let's see, we're in 2020. My dad would be 100 if he were alive now, right? So I was a very late birth child to my parents. They were in their 40s. I had two brothers and a sister that were so much older than me. Really, they were gone, grown, and doing their own thing. As I have childhood memories, they weren't around much because they were that much older than me. So but I had a very positive, happy childhood, and have tried to really emulate my mom and how I raised my kids and those kind of things. She's a wonderful lady. She's 95 now and still living in the same house that I grew up in, and is happy and healthy for her age.
We all love Momma Storm. We do. I loved it. I love the promos, man.
That was one of those things that, when I said it, it was kind of in my mind, it was just kind of I was stating a fact. It was a throwaway line. Yeah. And the fact that anybody, if you ever go back and watch that, I almost don't hesitate as I just keep going, because I didn't think anybody was going to respond to that. And it kind of took on a life of its own. But there's very few funnier things in life than to hear your 95-year-old mama refer to herself as Momma Storm, right? So it's been a good thing. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. Right, so fast forward a bit now, Tim. When did you begin watching wrestling? I'm looking forward to the answers to this.
Growing up centrally located in the South, Saturdays for most kids, and I'm older, so what I'm going to say, if some people are like, yeah, I've heard of those, but I didn't watch them. But, Saturdays were Scooby-Doo and, Banana Split. It was old cartoons, but not for me. And, it's funny because I say this and it's just a fact. And my mom would say, I don't remember that. Right? I don't remember you. But Saturdays for me was wrestling. That's what I looked forward to. And because of where I was located in the South, we got USWA in the morning, which is Jerry Lawler's promotion, which is, over the years that had everything from Boogie Woogie Man and Kamala. Everybody who was anybody, Mean Mark Calloway later becomes The Undertaker. Papa Shango at the time was, everybody came through there, and that was kind of a training ground. I got that in the morning. In the afternoons, I got Georgia Championship Wrestling, which is going to become the NWA, Mid-South. And I got that, around, I guess 6:05 becomes the time, because later on with the NWA Power, that becomes our time. And then at night, I got World Class Championship Wrestling from Texas, which is the Von Erichs, the Freebirds. So 3 times a day, I basically was scheduling to watch wrestling and just fell in love. The Mid-South, which were mostly the NWA guys, would come through Pine Bluff, Arkansas about once or twice a year to the convention center, and I'd try to get to go see them live. And nobody in my family was really a wrestling fan, but they would drop me off, at the front door with usually a friend, and pick me up when it was over. And some of my personal wrestling motivation was from some of those shows.
I know you've obviously listed the guys across the different territories there, but yeah, just some. Which wrestlers stood out for you, Tim? Who did you gravitate to? Who did you like watching?
Well, and I know that, and I'm going to answer knowing that while people are familiar with him because of my age, they're old, they're guys now that are legends in the business. But the guys that I grew up my first wrestling memory is a guy named Danny Hodge, who was a national champion, amateur wrestler, and is one of the toughest guys in the history of business. And until the last, 4 or 5 years ago, was the commissioner for the athletic commission in Oklahoma. And then more, I guess, for most fans, Dusty Rhodes is a huge influence. I loved watching him, and the charisma and the way his matches were. Matter of fact, I've watched more YouTube wrestling in the last 7 weeks than I have in 7 years, and I just watched a Dusty Rhodes match that was a tag match with Ron Garvin against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. And as that begins to grow, Harley Race was a huge influence. I loved watching him, and it was one of the toughest guys in the history of the business. Ric Flair as a world champion, those guys. And then Arn Anderson, I think, was one of the – I want to say underrated, because I think the world knows how good he was. But, he never held a world title. He held a lot of TV titles and things like that. But those are the guys that kind of influenced me. And then because of my current – as I got bigger and older and stronger, and I found that the more wrestling I did, technical-wise, the less money I seemed to make, and I became more of a brawler. So Bruiser Brody and those guys started kind of influencing. Terry Funk kind of started influencing the way I worked in the ring.
That's cool. Good answer. That was a good answer. That. Were there any particular events in the wrestling calendar that stood out? Like, obviously it's pre-pay-per-view around that time, wasn't it? Any events around that time that stood out for you?
Well, I know the one that really registered, and registered in my life. I went to a live event at the Pine Bluff Convention Center, and the convention center, I've now wrestled there 4 or 5 times, which is a huge thing for me to go back and main event at the place that I grew up watching wrestling. But I know that I went with a friend of mine, and I'm going to guess we were probably 14 years old, 13, something like that. And the main event, and I can tell you some of the matches. I know that night, for example, was Hacksaw Butch Reed against Hacksaw Jim Duggan. And in the funny part of it, because I laugh now, it was on a coal miner's glove on a pole match, which is hilarious, right? Which really was just a leather glove, I'm sure, on a pole. But I thought that was the greatest thing. But the main event that night, and this is kind of my moment where I just went, oh, I've got to do that. Was the main event was Ken Patera, at the time, world's strongest man, Olympic powerlifter, against Andre the Giant in the main event. And the mental picture that I want people to have is back in I hate to say the old days, but back in the day, it wasn't the light show that we see now. It was one single, what they called a kettle light. And the kettle light was over the ring, so it cast the ring in a bright light, and everything around it was black. So the match that night, Andre the Giant, the finish of the match was Andre picking up Ken Patera for a body slam. And when he picked him up, his feet hit that kettle light. And it just started. So, and I know it was like I heard angels sing. It was like, oh, and that's the finish. And I just went, that's unhuman. How does it, so that's the memory that is set in my head. And, we didn't know how long wrestling was going to last that night. We knew what time we were being picked up. So, everybody leaves, everybody's clearing out. And I have like 40 minutes before I'm being picked up. So I look around and nobody's looking. Everybody's gone. The arena's kind of empty, and I snuck into the ring, climbed up on the second rope, and raised my arms, and I was like, I've got to do this. So it was planted at whatever age that was, 12, 13, 14 years old, and it waned at times, but it never went away.
That's cool, man. That's cool. You said about the glove match. My next question was going to be, did any match stipulations float your boat?
I find personally that, and a lot of wrestling purists won't like this, I find that for me personally, the more stipulations there are, the easier the match for me. I'm a brawler. If I try to go in, if you want to use our current world champion, if I want to go in and try to go hold for hold with Nick Aldous, I'm not going to be successful. Technically, he is a much better wrestler. But if I'm going to go in and throw punches and just fight, I have a better chance. So I know that wrestling purists, and I don't do many gimmick matches anymore, but because that's not where I'm at, and as a face, that's not an opportunity. But the more violent and gimmicky a match is, the more my chance of success and the more fun I'm going to have, and really, to me, the easier the match is going to be.
Cool. When did you begin wrestling training? That's the next one. A bit of a jump now, Tim.
Well, and there's the weird thing, because I told you that at 12 or 13, it never went away. I always wanted to do it. but I didn't step into a ring for the first time until I was at least 30, which is, that's the age where most guys are getting out of the business, right? They've been working for 8 or 10 years. Their bodies are beat up. And now I got to a point, and I was married, had 2 kids, a house payment, 2 car. I mean, I was the vice president of a company. And I was playing, which I don't know how big it is, all over the world, but in the South back then, we're talking the 90s, softball was a huge thing. And I was traveling on a travel team every weekend, playing at a very high level. And it was what I did. And at some point I remember just saying, I want to try a new challenge, because I've always been an athlete. I've always been competitive at something. I have to. And my first call was to WCW Power Plant. And obviously at that point, I wasn't going to walk away from my responsibilities for my family and just say, okay, I'm no longer the vice president of this company. But I found a local place to train. And I think I always get this mixed up. I now have been wrestling at least 25 years. My daughter corrected me at one point and said, no, you weren't 30. So I was probably 31 when I actually started, because of my size, because I was 6'3", probably 290 at the time. I got thrown into the ring into matches on shows pretty quickly, way before I was ready physically, knowledge-wise. I just got in there and started fighting, and was not very good. But so I started training in a little place called Paris, Arkansas. It's about a 2-hour drive from where I lived. I made that trip a couple times a week. Got beat up, and it's as old school as you can possibly imagine. It's where you got in there and they would say, okay, here's how you grab this hold that can break an arm. Now here's how you do it that may not break, that you can be a little safer. And then the last 30 minutes was us rolling on the mat, legitimately grappling and fighting. And, it was a great place. The ring was set up and the roof was so short, so low, that you couldn't stand on the second rope without hitting your head. So learning to take moves and take bumps and try to protect myself, routinely my feet would hit the roof. It was old school as you can be, and we just beat the crap out of each other every day.
Who trained you, Tim?
Most people will not remember but this guy was very, very big in wrestling back in the 70s and into the 80s, a guy named Wild Bill Ash. And Bill was what now we would consider a cruiserweight. He held titles all over, and I think he worked for every major company and held titles in every major company. Not a big guy, very cerebral, big on, he taught me psychology. This is why this makes sense. He was not really, really big on, I don't want to say the physical part. I want to say, cardio was not a big deal to him. We didn't do cardio drills. We just didn't. Rolling and grappling was cardio. I worked not a whole lot my first 3 or 4 years under that, and tried to, started getting experience and started going to different shows. And then when I moved to Dallas, I walked in to help train people, because at 4 or 5 years, I was a veteran as far as most people were concerned. But in reality, I started training a completely different style, and I learned more. It was 4 or 5 years before I learned how to protect myself on a bump. And the guy that I was training with, supposedly I was helping to train, but really I was just learning more, was just the opposite as Bill Ash. It was more of a lucha style, more of a lot of Japanese stuff, and it was very little psychology, but the physical aspect of it was the complete opposite. We would go in and do 45 minutes of cardio drills before we ever started anything else. So over the years, I've learned that now I can work, as I get older, I don't know what I can do, but I can work any style, because now I had the old school, let's get down and beat on each other and technical style. And then I had a different style, which was run and gun and post and take big moves, because I was the big guy and post for people, So that benefited me over the years.
Wait, which guys were you training with at the time?
Now I look at it and think, they're people that I know really well. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody in the world knows now. It was the guys who I trained with Bill Ash. a lot of those guys didn't stay in the business. We were literally in a tiny, tiny town in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. Bill ran shows and was a good promoter, not a great promoter, but a good promoter. And I got experience doing a lot of things. Even while I was training, I got to do some broadcast experience and things like that that'll later come back to help me. And then with the new group, while these guys, some of them are still working, some are very good. I don't think, my tag partner, kind of comes out of that. He and I've tagged off and on for 15, 20 years. A guy named Apocalypse, Adam Asher, who is super talented and still works a lot. Other than that, I don't know that a lot of those guys even continued forward.
When and where was your first match?
Out of that training with Bill Ash, and Bill was an old school guy. Okay, this is some people will laugh and some people just shake their head. Bill would take a lawn chair, a folding lawn chair, and he'd put it in the corner and he would sit there with a 2x4 on his lap. That was his, and he would talk. That was his training. But he had a guy who he had trained, a guy named Jeff Jett, who did most of he would run the drills and those kind of things. So we would get in there and, Bill would tell us what to do. And his philosophy was, you can only learn one or two moves a week because you're not going to remember them. So he would teach those one or two moves, and then the next week review those holds, and then try to teach you one more. So it was a long, drawn-out process. And out of that, what's going to happen is, Bill didn't want us running spots. He didn't. That wasn't training to him. That wasn't true wrestling. You got in there and just went. So Bill, we'd finish training. Bill would lock the door, and we would all stand outside just talking and visiting and wait for Bill to leave. And then Jeff would take a screwdriver when Bill left, and he'd pop the lock on the door, and we'd go back in, and that's where I started learning, to put matches together and those kind of things. Well, Jeff had an opportunity. He called me, and he said, hey, there's this group that wants to run a charity. They're going to rent the ring, but they would like to have some real wrestlers on the show to have at least one real match. And my first match was in a school auditorium, a tag match with the guy with three guys, other guys I was training with. And, I know the results of that. I remember coming to the back, and Jeff, the guy who really was heading up my training, goes, you actually did pretty good for a first match. And my response, first of all, I couldn't breathe. I mean, I had no concept of the cardio that's involved with wrestling. I'd never done it in a match. I'd done it in workouts. And I got my breath, and I said, I hope so. I've been waiting 30 years to do that match, right? Because it's what I'd always wanted to do. So, in the big picture, a lot of you've heard guys talk about their bump card, right? I mean, you have so many bumps on your card, you don't know what that number is. I think it might have benefited me starting that late. I didn't start bumping until I was, let's say 31, right? So my bump card I had 10 years of no bumps. That was pretty good. It took me 5 years to even learn how to bump, and I was still trying to have matches. So, that's where my first match was, and it wasn't bad. Cool. I'm sure I've had some stinkers since then, but it wasn't bad.
Where were you wrestling? I've put my question there. I put Arkansas, but obviously you're in Texas, weren't you? So the question would be, where were you wrestling in Texas early on in your career? That'd be there just to.
I hooked up. I actually had decided I moved to Texas for a job, and it was a big deal because I didn't really want to leave Arkansas. It's the only place I'd ever lived. My wife's from there. We had 2 kids there. But I had someone who continually offered me more money to come take a job as a vice president of a company here. So when I came here and took the job, I thought, okay, this is one of those big boy real life situations, right? I'm looking at going to working, 60 or 80 hours a week. I've got a job that is paying me a lot of money, and I really need to get serious. And I kind of stepped away from wrestling, really kind of with the intent of not going back. And I got hooked up with a group called the Christian Wrestling Federation, and that's kind of where I started helping train and retrain. And we literally went all over the United States, made a tour of Africa. We got on a 16-passenger van at one point I was doing this full time, and a 16-passenger van, and literally went in a van all over the United States, pulling a trailer and a ring, and you name it, we'd been there. and then I got involved with a group called PCW, Professional Championship Wrestling, based in Arlington, Texas, which is where you said, you went to WrestleMania.
Yeah, absolutely.
We had local TV that was a great talent roster, good production quality, and then just kind of expanded from there. Because I someday I'm going to do a map of the United States and put pins on every state that I've wrestled. I've never done that. I've never wrestled in Alaska. I've been to Hawaii but never wrestled there. I'm curious what states I haven't wrestled in. I know that on my introduction to the world, which kind of came out of the NWA 10 Pounds of Gold originally, I am known in my area, right? The Arkansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, that's Oklahoma. That was my playground, about 8 or 9 states down here. But truthfully, at some point, I've been on the East Coast. I've been on the West Coast. I've wrestled just about everywhere.
That's incredible. I'll tell you what, the young guys that are aspiring to go across the country and do it, well, you've done it, so that's cool, man. That's cool.
Well, it's a good thing, and here's what I would tell any aspiring wrestler is, and you just don't get this until you do it. It's crowds. A big part of wrestling is being able to respond to how a crowd responds to you. And the weird thing is, it's different everywhere, right? I can, ideally, I mean, this is theoretically, I could have a match in Texas that they love, and I may have that match in Rhode Island and they may hate it, right? So I have to be able to adjust on how the crowd reacts to what I'm doing in the ring. And you can't get that experience unless you're out there, performing, working in front of different crowds. And you learn, okay, well, I'm a big wrestling history guy, and Mick Foley's first book is one of my favorites. And he talks about his first wrestling trip to Africa, and he was wrestling Dominic DeNucci, who is the guy who trained him. And he said that he tried everything that he could possibly think of for this crowd outside in Africa to nothing, to crickets chirping. He took a backdrop on the floor, on the grass on the outside, nothing. And he said Dominic DeNucci grabbed a rear chin lock and locked it in, and the crowd went nuts. And he said at that moment, it was like an awakening for me that you have to listen and see what the crowd wants. And he said for the next 15 minutes, we went through every wrestling amateur hold that I had ever learned and made some up, and the crowd clapped along with us. So you have to be able to listen and hopefully react to what the crowd wants, because ultimately, you got two people to please. You've got the crowd, and then the guy who's the promoter that's paying you. Ultimately, those are the people that have to be happy. And if you do those things, you're in pretty good shape.
You touched upon PCW. How was your time for traditional championship wrestling between 2010 and 2015? I know it's a bit of a fast forward there, Tim.
No, we're good. That's TCW?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the guys that I helped train and then trained with under Bill Ash was a guy named Matt Riviera. And Matt started his first time when he was probably 15 and kept coming back off and on over the years. So Matt and I became good friends. And Matt started this group called Traditional Championship Wrestling. And I still look at it and don't know why it didn't just go crazy worldwide. It was old school, traditional, physical wrestling with one of the best locker rooms one of them that I've ever been in. The talent roster was amazing. The match, it was competitive. Storyline, it was, the quality of the production was fantastic. And, Matt brought me into that. I'd been wrestling for him off and on prior to, under different names. And then when he started that, he said, I want to do this TV. I want to kind of build the promotion. I want to use you, kind of as my linchpin. It was and still stands up. Like right now, I think it's still on in some places almost 10 years later. And now it's called TCW Classics. It wasn't just in the United States. There were, other countries that were showing TCW, but oh man, it was on any given night, it was what wrestling should be. You watch the matches before you, and you could feel, okay, all right, I see. I got it. I better raise this a notch. And every match would do that. We were challenging each other. You wanted to have as good or a better match than the guys before you. And the bar kept being raised and kept being raised. And, from a learning experience, I mean, I think I carried their main title 2 or 3 times, and great competition. There wasn't a bad worker on the roster, and you better be ready to go every single night. It was great.
What were some of your favorite moments from TCW?
There were a lot. I think the biggest moment, one of the philosophies in wrestling is you never turn your top babyface heel. That's a big move. And I mean, for wrestling historians, it's been done. For really old school guys, I think one of the best wrestling angles ever run was Mr. Wrestling #2 and Magnum TA, where the teacher turned on the student out of jealousy, and for Mr. Wrestling 2 became the heel, and it did big money. When Hulk Hogan walks down the aisle and is part of the NWO, the world went nuts and it got a jump off. Well, probably my biggest moment of that was the heel faction that I had been battling with for a year, called the Empire. I turned heel at a big moment on one of the other top faces and won the championship back, and it jump started us, and it jump started me into a whole different ballpark of, okay, I get to do everything again and do it from a different angle and enjoy it and have fun again. It's always a personal challenge to me. I always thought I was a better heel than a face. I guess the world has convinced me that's not true now. People can't imagine booing me, but I always enjoyed working on the other side too.
It's strange, like watching all the stuff for yourself to now, into the as a face, like you say, just that's cool, man. That's cool.
Turnbuckle TV is the home of UK Wrestling On Demand, featuring over 40 UK wrestling promotions and other wrestling-related channels. Subscribe today from just $1.99 and start your free 1-month trial now.
I saw some water in the middle of the sea, walked up to it and I realized the truth was not serene. A dream can be a monster that reveals itself to you. Don't look away on the avenues, the streets have many clues. So who are you? I do not know. When your soul becomes a crow, ride the boat so you can grow into a place that is low. The shadow goes into plateaus. So here we go. So here we go. So here we go. So here we go.
How did your relationship begin with the NWA?
I look back historically for me, and the NWA to me was always wrestling. As a kid, watching wrestling, everybody has their own style. The Tennessee style is famous for being what I would call a walk and talk style with good wrestling. At night, watching the Von Erichs, if you've read anybody's read any history on that, there are guys who talk about the fact that, they would get home from a show and have to honk the horn to have somebody come out and help them out of the car because it was so physical. It was this real, it was a legit fight every time you got in the ring with any of the Von Erichs. One of my almost full-time traveling partners is a guy who was one of the bookers there, one of the referees there, so I get feedback on that kind of stuff. But to me, wrestling was always NWA. It was, the Four Horsemen, Hawk and Animal, Mr. Wrestling 2 and Magnum came out of that. All of those guys to me were wrestling. So I had this place in my heart that the NWA was always wrestling. And I can even remember maybe my second year in the business going up in the mountains of Arkansas up into, to somebody who was calling themselves an NWA franchise. And I thought that was the greatest thing ever. Now, when I got there, it was just somebody using the letters, right? Because they knew the history. But my first real NWA connection, I had a guy walk up to me for old school fans. Here in Texas, every year we have this thing called the Red Bastille Shootout. Red Bastille was a world-class wrestler all over the world, back in the 60s and 70s. And it's a gathering of wrestlers and people in the business, and we just get together and talk. And had this guy walk up to me at one of those shootouts and introduce himself. He said, "My name is Robert Langdon. I run NWA Oklahoma and NWA part, Texoma, which is, part of Texas. And he goes, I want you to be my Kerry Von Erich. I want you on every show from now on forever. Well, he couldn't have picked somebody that would have been closer to my heart. I mean, Kerry Von Erich was like, okay, he was a, he was a Greek statue, anyway. So the very first time I worked for this promoter, I won the NWA Oklahoma Heavyweight Championship. And then it just became a relationship building thing. I guess it's like anything else. I worked for that promoter. I think if you go out and you work professionally and you have good matches and you represent yourself well and you represent the product and the promotion, and it just kind of grew into that. That was my first experience. I worked for Robert for solid, matter of fact, booked for his show for 4 or 5 years and did everything. For maybe, 8 years. We're still good friends. I still go up there and do shows for him occasionally. But James Beard, the guy that I said was my travel partner, becomes the director of talent and operations for the NWA under the old ownership group. Mm-hmm. And we built a relationship. And just to put James over, not just because he's my friend, but James is the only referee in history to work for every major promotion, both in the United States and in Japan. And it's a long story, but he literally sat down and wrote the book of wrestling in Japan that they use today. Here's the move. This is the American word for it, so that when you're in the ring. So, this is one of my travel guys, and through that relationship, I won the NWA North American title, which right now is not in use. I won that twice, and then eventually builds that up to the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship that I won at Texoma, my home promotion in front of my home fans. So the NWA always had a special place in my heart. So when you on NWA Power, when you hear me say, I love those 3 letters. It's an absolute truth. It's my heart. It's what I grew up wanting to do.
Absolutely. Comes across, I'll tell you that. I love it. How was it winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship with the well-regarded lineage of that title? That's my next one.
It's a deal where, again, I'm one of those guys that if you see it, it's real. For me, if I show emotion, there's nothing fake about my emotion. And because of my love for the NWA, because of my love for the history, because of growing up and knowing that was wrestling, on that night that I won the title, I had maybe 3 or 4, well, more than that. Back in my second year of wrestling, I had a shot at Dan Severn for the NWA Worlds title and was completely unprepared. So you fast forward that 20-something years later, winning that NWA Worlds title. And, James Beard was our referee. Nobody I trust more. Jax Dane was the world's champion, who I had numerous matches against and lost trying to win that world championship in front of my home crowd, right? At my base of operations where they loved me. The emotion was real. Here's the thing I knew, and this is what I was thinking in the ring, because I think I was crying in the ring when it happened. And people go, "Oh, come on, how do you cry?" Well, it does. It means that much to me. But I knew at that moment that they could never take my name off that list, and that I had just joined a list of some of the greatest names in the history of professional wrestling. And if you go down that list, I think I was the 53rd man to hold it. Well, I guarantee you, of those 53 names or 54 names, 40 of those are Hall of Famers. You go back to Lou Thez and come all the way up through the lineage. It is literally a who's who of professional wrestling history. So on that day, on that night, in that ring, when they put that title literally around my waist, it was. I said it later, and again, if I said it was my mountaintop. Nothing can beat that moment. Nothing. Nobody. I didn't have any idea how long I would hold that. Nobody does. I think Giant Baba held it for one day and then turned it, lost it the next night. I think Kerry Von Erich held it for maybe 3 weeks before he lost it back to Ric Flair. It didn't matter how long. I just knew on that night my name was on that list. And to me, when I said it's my mountaintop, doesn't get any bigger than that.
That's cool. My question was actually about the reign. You're saying about days, previous guys, how long they had it. And the next question was, holding a belt for 400 plus days, it's almost unheard of in modern wrestling. How was it having the NWA Worlds title, something you hold so dear, for that length of time, Tim?
It's one of those things that there are no negatives to it, right? It's all positive. On any given night, you're literally going to get, when you defend it at whatever promotion, you're going to get the most talented, the best wrestler in that promotion that they're going to put up. Then you're going to get the best match because it's a big deal to them. You can't have an off night, right? I mean, you can't. And the only negative is it's kind of like being a pro coach. If you're a coach in any sport, you know that eventually you're going to get fired, right? I mean, as a coach. Well, you know that at some point somebody's going to beat you, and holding it for 400 days. First off, I never would have guessed that I could have retained it that long. You think at some point you're going to have a bad night, or there's going to be a change of some kind. But the negative is it becomes part of you, and then when you lose that, and you're going to eventually, when you lose that, that's a big part of you that's taken away, and that's the way competition goes. That's the way wrestling goes. That's the way sports goes. At some point somebody's you're gonna have a off night, or somebody's gonna be better than you, or there are a lot of those nights that I beat guys that were probably better than me. But you're the world champion. It's your job to go out there and do that. It was the way that one of the big questions that I one of my favorite things that I've ever heard was, does the title make the man, or does the man make the title? Right. I guess in this case it was a little of both. I think that coming from where the NWA was not as respected, was not in a high-profile situation. So I think I was able to bring that up. But along the same lines, I was the same person that I was before winning it, but now I'm looked at completely different. You walk into a room as the NWA World, or locker room as the NWA Worlds Champion, and I'm the same guy that I was 3 weeks ago or a month ago when I walked into this locker room, and now I'm being looked at completely differently in a positive way, right? I mean, it's a great thing. I want to do it again. I miss it. I want to do it again. You got me all.
I want you to, obviously, you can't face Aldous again, and that's going to be my next question. You lost the belt to the national treasure, Nick Aldous. We hold him in high esteem over here, obviously.
Me too.
Followed his career from, obviously, the TNA, and to see where he is now is incredible. And the question is, how much did you enjoy your matches with Nick? That was the end to the question.
I always want to be careful because I'll probably do it again, but what I end up doing when I start talking about Nick is I am, as for somebody who we've beat the snot out of each other so many times, I have way too many good things to say about him. But I'm going to anyway. He is absolutely the total package. Okay, here I go. It's, every time I see the guy, and we've become friends, where we started off as competitors, we're now like a mutual respect. Every time I see Nick, I think, I don't remember him being that big. He's a big guy. He's 6'4" at least, 240 pounds. He works extremely hard in the weight room, and it shows. So he's a big guy. He also goes up to the top rope and hits a beautiful top rope elbow at 6'4", 240 or 250. So that's amazing. Plus, he's got the British background of the technical wrestler. I do not want to go hold for hold with Nick Aldous because I can't. He's better than that. So you put all those things together, and then the other part of wrestling to make somebody great is their mic work. Nick put the NWA World title on his shoulders and went on 5 continents, whatever it was that he defended it. But then when we get to NWA Power, he kicks us off with money promos. Right? Mm-hmm. He's great on the mic, and the crowds love him. And he carries that first season as the world champion that everybody loves. And then at a moment when, I end up getting speared in the middle of the ring and getting beat down by this group, now he can't cut a promo. He can't get his promo out without getting booed. So I'm just pointing out, as a face, super successful. As a heel, super successful. Yeah. So the guy is – and – anytime the first match we had was the world title shot. Never been in the ring with the guy, didn't know him, and that's always challenging. To be in the ring with anybody. Nick said in one of his promos, and he said it in a not happy way with me. He goes, Tim, what you're going to understand is there's different levels in wrestling, and I'm on a different level. And what I learned was it's the truth. I came out on top of the first match and realized I got a whole different level if I want to be able to compete with Nick. True story. It's somebody asked me in an interview maybe 6 months ago. They said, I shouldn't tell this because I'm putting him over too much. They said, Tim, did you mentor Nick as the NWA World Champion? And I went, no, if anything, Nick mentored me. We sat down in an airport after a first match and broke down the match. And I was very disappointed I thought I could have done a lot better. I have never been in a situation. It had been so long since I've been in a situation where I didn't feel like I carried not just my load, but I carried the load of the match. And in this case, I didn't. I felt like I had not pulled my part of the load. And Nick, we broke the match down. He had some good things to say. He had some things, that I could work on. And his comment was, well, Tim, you've been the world champion for a long time. He said, but I want you to understand that at 19 years old, I was now in the ring with some of the greatest people in this business. I was in the ring with Sting and AJ Styles and Samoa Joe and the Steiners and, all of the great British wrestlers that had come through there. And he goes, you haven't had that opportunity. I was forced to do that at 19. You didn't have that learning ability, and I did. So that's the difference when I say levels. I have that to benefit from. So anyway, that was a long answer too, but Nick is the real deal. Nick is the real deal. We've had some good matches. We complement each other. The things that I may not do well, he does great, and I am competitive enough that I can, I care so much that I pull my load too. It's a contrast in styles. Nick is a technical genius, and I'm a punch you in the mouth and kick you, when I can. That's my thing. I'm just a physical wrestler.
You're humble as well.
What you see is what you get. I always hesitate. I don't want it. Should I put the world champion that I want to beat? Should I talk so good about it? I can't help it because it's just the truth.
Yeah.
So.
That's cool, man. That's cool. Right, Tim, I'm a huge fan of your wrestling, but I gravitated most. We touched upon this pre-recording. I liked your heartfelt promos on NWA Power. I need to read this out. The realism you evoke is something young guys in the business could learn a lot from. What promo advice would you give these guys?
One of the things that I've been fortunate to do is with James Beard, we've been doing some clinics, teaching. And I talk about, I think because I'm a natural communicator, I have an advantage. Some people just aren't, it's not natural for them to stand up in front of people, but I've been doing that my whole life. Here would be my advice, and I'm passing on advice that's not mine, right? You have to find something that means something to you. It's like and I know that's probably part of the problems that we see in wrestling today is if you're handed a script and said, go out there and say this, what you're saying is not you, right? I mean, you're saying somebody else's words and somebody else's you may not have a feeling for. Dusty Rhodes makes the comment, and one of the things that we talked about, and I've been blessed to be able to spend time with some of the great promo guys in the business. Jake Roberts that took me under his wing. I mean, and no matter what you think about Jake as a person, the man was talented and one of the greatest psychologists in the business. Incredible. But Dusty Rhodes says, don't practice your promos. He goes, because if you practice them, they become a rehearsed, they're not emotional. You lose all the emotion in it. So, for me, and I'll say it again, nobody was more surprised that people love my promos. Nobody's more surprised than I was. Because I'm not out there putting on a show, right? I'm out there speaking from my heart. You got to believe what you're saying. If you don't, nobody's going to believe it either. So I spend a lot of time in my head in what Mick Foley would call promo land. Where I'm having, this is what's important to me. This is the message I want to say. How am I going to say it? I don't know. Let's see how it comes out. And a lot of times I'm standing at the curtain, about to walk out to the podium or whatever, and I'm literally going, wonder what I'm going to say this time, right? The big relief for me prior to episode 1 of NWA Power, I had a conversation on the phone with Dave Lagana. I had been told, I knew my match was against Nick. That was not a surprise. But he goes, I want to give you like 60 or 90 seconds at the podium, at ringside. You start thinking about what you want to say. And I said, okay. And I had some things I wanted to say. I wanted people to understand how important it was to me, the opportunity. And my concern was legitimate. I don't feel stressed to go out there and do that. It's at NWA, they don't say this. They say sink or swim. Here's your time. You go out there, and if you either make it or you don't. And so my stress was none of that. My stress was, I've only got 60 seconds. How am I going to get this message? I've got so much things in my heart that I want to. How am I going to get that out? So I'm standing at the curtain, about to walk through. Remember, no music, no nothing, right? That's NWA Power. That's old school. And I'm thinking, what do I take out that I want to say? And Billy Corrigan walks up at Gorilla, and he goes, hey, Tim, don't worry about the time. You go out. We believe in you. Do what you want to do. If something goes wrong, we can always edit it. Just go say what you want to say. And then what the results are, is fortunately people like what I had to say. And I just believe if you stand up and speak from your heart, and if you're, and in wrestling, that's a challenge, right? Depending on your role, if I had to go out there and say I hate the world or I hate Nick, whatever, that's a whole lot more difficult to say than the truth. So you got to believe in what you're saying, and that's easy. When they say go out and say what you want, I can say what I believe. That's easy.
It's cool. It's good advice, sound advice for these kids that are coming through. We've got a lot of young talent over here coming through. I've had the fair few on, so that's good. They'll take a lot of stuff from that. Thank you for that answer. Which wrestlers in the current product do you think are destined for greatness into the future? And not that I'm asking you to play favourites, Tim, but it's just, who do you think is standing out currently?
Are you saying with the NWA and wrestling in general?
I think as a whole, but if you want to, start with Power, maybe.
Okay, let me give you the Power, because and some of these aren't necessarily young wrestlers. They're going to be successful. And really, because I'm going to say this, and I don't know if it's a good thing to say or not, but from an NWA standpoint, I think a guy that I've known for 5 or 6 years, Ricky Starks, is amazingly athletically talented, and the way he presents himself and his promos are great. He has said some. As a matter of fact, I met him at a curtain after one of his promos. I was like, "Where did that come from?" He goes, "I don't know, because it was so good." I was mad at myself. I can't even remember exactly what it was, but some reference to the Last Supper and Judas, and I was like, "Yeah, it was money. Where does that come from?" Right? Caleb Conley is super talented, super athletic. I think he's got and he's somebody who's been around for a while, but he's unbelievably talented, athletically, great look. And then there's a lot, our good thing is we have a great mixture of guys who are, you got everybody from Rock and Roll Express that have been doing this for 40 or 50 years, who are just fantastic guys to be around. And it's just an ongoing learning experience to talk to, and to have those guys come up and go, that was a money interview, or, I want to work with those kind of things. That's good. That's fun. On the other end, you've got the young guys, but also there in the middle, we've got some guys that are just stars. No, there's no other way to look at it. And I hate to start naming names, because as soon as you do, I'm going to leave somebody out. But, obviously James Storm has a proven history in the business and is super talented. Eli Drake, unbelievable. His mic work, his in-ring ability, it's just amazing. Yeah. The Pope, Elijah Burke, has been on the last couple, and he and I go back a long time. But another gifted guy athletically, and you put a mic in his hand, and it's magic. There are stars. There are guys who are stars before they ever got there. They're going to be bigger stars, and there's guys that are young that are going to be huge stars. There are guys who have been on the circle squared stuff that I've known for a long time that if they get their opportunity are going to explode in NWA Power. You know, we're just in a good spot. And I say that knowing, and again, when you're in that locker room and you see a guy show up that has a history and you know his talent level, you're going to get a couple of emotions. And I may be the only guy that would say this out loud, but you're going to see like I've known Elijah Burke off and on for a long time. We're friends. We get along great, super respect. He walked in the locker room, and my first thought was, uh-oh, we just got better. What's that going to, what's that going to, from a company standpoint, oh, that's fantastic. From a personal standpoint, what, did I just lose some mic time? Did I, it's because there's so many talented guys. But that's the competition of our business. I
was going to say it's going to breed competition for
Absolutely.
you at the same time. Yeah, it's cool, man. I'm a big fan of, I've had him on, actually, a few months back. Outlandish Sicky Dice.
Yeah.
Superb.
Well, and I think that what they recognized in Ziggy was the character, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's completely into that. That's his character. That's who he is. We're so, I mean, you see it with, like with Stu, when Stu Bennett comes in and starts doing his stuff, and you can see guys, and you'll see the compliment line. You can see the little graph thing in your head. It's like, okay, that was a money interview. That was a money interview. Eli Drake is money. James Storm and Eli together, that's magic.
Yeah.
Eddie Kingston,
just
believably real because that's him, right?
Yeah.
Nick goes out with the mic and his money. I mean, it's just person after person. Our female, Thunder Rosa, incredibly talented. Allison Kay, incredibly talented. Marty Bell, incredibly talented. I mean, you go through this list, and it's like, hey, this, I've been in some really good locker rooms in my history. This is the best, without a doubt.
I love it. I just like the hour. I like the fast-paced hour, like the old days. Even when I was a kid watching, I've watched since 1990, Tim. I find with WWE, in my opinion, it's too long. It's too long. I like the format with Power, and I like MWL's format with the hour. I think that's the best.
Yeah, it lends itself to a faster pace and is tighter, right? Yeah. I mean, if you have to do 3 hours of programming or 2 hours of programming, from a financial standpoint, how do you say no, right? You've got somebody who is going to pay you to put out that programming, so it's hard to say no to money to anybody. But the advantage to even a 30-minute program is, okay, we're going to compress that into 2 matches and 2 promos and promote what's coming. It's tighter, it's better, it's easier to follow, and an hour investment's way easier than a 2-hour, 3-hour investment. And
I like the fact that obviously ROH as well, Ring of Honor, there's been cross promotion. That's a win-win for both sides as well.
Completely agree. And anytime you see, it's okay. Back in my softball days, right? I wanted to be on a roster of guys where I was the 10th or 11th best player because I knew I was good, right? So if I'm on a roster where I'm batting 10th or 11th, the 10 or 11 guys in front of me are amazing. Well, that's how you have to look at your product in wrestling, right? If I want to be on a roster that the competition is there and that there's so many talented guys, everybody's fighting for their position, and not in a negative way, because our locker room it's all different personalities, all different ages, all different backgrounds. But when we get in there, you can see. I mean, you walk through it. If you cut that money promo, somebody in the back when you walk back is, did you just reference Eminem on a promo? And now their mind's working. Or they'll come to you and say, I'm gonna say this. What do you think? How do you look at? So it's a very positive, competitive, make each other better situation.
That's cool. Right. Got a nice question here. I think it's nice. I'm sure you'll think it's nice. How is Momma Storm? I like how you include Momma Storm in the promos and the interviews. How is she?
Good. that was never my intent. Honestly, I did not walk out there with the master plan of. I mean, it would have been funny, right? If I could have said, "Hey, watch me get my mom over here," right? It just, like I said, it was a true statement. I am the youngest of 4 kids. I mean, if I could do the math, my brother that's closest to me in age, which is no longer with us, was probably 15 or 16 years older than me. He was the closest. I've got a sister right now that's 76, and she's the oldest and still living. So I really am Momma Storm's baby boy. You know, it was like being an only child. So Mom is good, but one of the challenges, and for her age, for 95, super healthy. You know, she tells me all the time, well, I don't, in her words, I mean, we're from the country, right? I just don't have any steam. You know, I don't feel like I have the energy. And I'm like, well, Mom, you're 95. You're not going to have, right? But the challenge right now for, I guess, all of us in this really weird time that we've got, because we have debated, as you and I sit here today, Mother's Day here is this coming weekend. I have not seen my mom in 3 months. You know, the worst thing I can possibly, this whole self-quarantine, it means more to me than it does a lot of people, because I cannot in good conscience, if my mom has made it 95 years and 3 months of sitting, if I walked into that house and brought something with me, contact with somebody else, that would then lead to her getting sick and having to make a battle that's unnecessary, I couldn't live with myself. I mean, she's that important to me. So the whole quarantine thing and self-isolating and caring about other people, over here at least, there is a constant debate of everybody back to work, everybody go back to normal, and no, we should be more careful. And I have to err. I have to err on the safe side because I've got a 95-year-old mom, right, that I have to care about.
Absolutely.
So Momma Storm is good. She I can talk to her every day, and on a daily basis, this is her. You know, I hadn't been off this place in 7 weeks, which she didn't go anywhere anyway, right? I mean, she went to the grocery store at 95, maybe once every 2 weeks. So, but she's feeling the cabin fever, you know, to get out, but she's health-wise, she's doing fine. That's
good to hear, man. That's good. I thought I had to ask that question, Tim. And now my final question. This is not wrestling related. Now I saw some stuff. I think I saw it on Facebook, and obviously Tiger King exploded, and internationally, I've watched it. I watched it as soon as it came on Netflix, and I saw that you visited Joe Exotic's park in Oklahoma. Yeah. I bet you've been asked this question a fair few times. So I want to ask it. What was that like as an experience?
Well, here's Tim Storm's view of things. What I saw after that was anybody who had ever had any contact, and in wrestling we call it the rub, right? That everybody wanted that rub of, I approached it just the opposite. When it came out, I had not watched it immediately, and I don't know how, because I've watched everything on Netflix that there is, right? Because I'm isolated. My approach was the exact opposite. I called Dave Lagana and Billy, and I said, okay, these pictures of me and this guy that I know are already popping up. He has been found guilty of murder for hire and has been accused of abusing animals. I don't want this to have any kind of blowback on me or the NWA. How do you want to handle it? So mine was, I wanted to get out in front of all the negativity and make sure that everybody knew here's what I knew. And then, you know, people are always going to speculate. That's just people. So here's your answer. Okay. My experience was through NWA Texoma that I've mentioned a couple of times. The promoter and owner of that is an exotic animal guy. He owns a couple of monkeys at his home. Okay. He had donated for years to Joe Exotic's animal park to help feed the animals. And we were approached with, I really believe in this cause. Would you guys be willing, and I'll pay you, I'm not a saint in this. Would you guys be willing to go up and do a fundraiser at the park, try to raise money? The money that they earn will go toward feeding the animals. I did 2 shows up there, and I've made this comment before. There were more lions and tigers watching than there were people. As a fundraiser, it was a complete, not success. But, I would go as far as to say Joe and I were friends. He definitely he wanted to be different than everybody else. I mean, he wore the leather coat all the time, you know, with the dangles. He wore a sidearm all the time. But, you know, over the course of about a year, Joe brought his cameras and filmed our wrestling promotion, did commentary. He was terrible. He knew nothing about wrestling. But from a promotional standpoint, it was, if we can get our product out in front of potentially millions of people watching, it's going to benefit. You guys are going to be seen more. It's going to help us. I don't know that any of that actually happened as far as the success, but my point when I got out and tried to get out in front of all this was, I know nothing about murder for hire. I never saw abuse of animals. I went into the cage with, and this is one of those life experiences that I would never pass up. I walked into the cage with 10 or 11 500, 600-pound grown tigers with nothing but a golf club with no club on it. And it was one of those where I love animals, you know, and they are legitimately, most of those animals were raised in his living room, right? So they were not killers, but they were 500-pound cats who would love to play, and in their playfulness could destroy you, right? I mean, so it was that real weird line of, I'm surrounded by 500 or 600-pound grown tigers that can kill me, and they want to play. And if one playfully jumps on your back and you're underneath that animal, you are not in a good situation, right? So again, life experience that I would never, both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time, right? But, that was a great experience. I don't regret it. Never saw any of those things. And thankfully, I was never part of any of that. But
no.
Yeah, Joe Exotic exploded on the world, and I think it was a gift to the documentary people, because it happened at a time in quarantine where everybody's desperate for something to watch.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible. I feel a lot of sympathy for him. I think he was tarred and feathered by the others. They all came together. You actually feel sympathy for him.
Yeah.
Even though he was crazy and a bit of a lunatic. I
don't disagree with that. But, a lot of those, like I was on his studio TV show a couple times, right? And I never saw any of the threats that he made, I won't even publicly say her name just because I don't want to give the credit to him. But he put himself in a bad position, in by making those threats and shooting and blowing up. And, so he didn't do himself any favors on that.
No, of course.
I have no clue as guilt or innocent, and from a personal standpoint, I just don't know. I have no clue.
Tim, it's that time. Can you plug your social media, please, for the listeners and the viewers?
Okay. I am not a social media genius, but all of a sudden I feel like I'm watching my Twitter followers. So anybody out there, I looked yesterday, and I think it would be cool to get to 10,000 Twitter followers, right? So I'm at like 9,100 and something. So Tim Storm NWA Twitter, and for Instagram, which is also a growing thing, Tim Storm 01. Those are my two primary. I'm not one of those guys that I'm not a daily poster, because for the most part, I don't know why anybody would care what I have to say about politics or anything else. So I stay away from all of that. But yeah, if you want to check it out, please do. I'd love to get to that 10,000 mark. And I don't know what I'm going to do when I get there, but I would love to get there. Anybody can contact me on those, and I answer just about everything. Not necessarily comments, but if somebody sends me a message, you respond.
Well, I've asked you a lot of stuff.
Oh no, we're good, man.
Thank you so much for honestly for taking the time to answer me. It means a lot. It was an honor. It's an honor to have you on today.
Well, thank you, and I really meant what I said when I started. We're all in this wrestling thing together. You're helping us in wrestling, and if I can pay that back, I would love to do that. And it's been an honor and a pleasure to talk to you, Stu.
Thank you. The former NWA World Heavyweight Champion, The superstar of NWA Power. We'll be able to see it 6:05, actually 11:05 here on a Tuesday when it's all back up and running. Tim Storm, absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Stu.
Big thank you to Mike Angus for the show intro, as always. Superb, superb. Chris Dutton, thank you very much for editing once again. Appreciate it, buddy. And also to Lee, who does my website. Lee puts the stuff up on the website. Without you guys, I'd be screwed. So once again, as always, appreciate everything you do for me and the time you spend doing the things you do for me. It means a lot, guys. And a big thank you for the show intro and the outro. It's my good pal Stephen Ash, a good school friend of mine. And it's called Keeping On, and it's by Stephen Ash. Keep your eyes peeled, Steve's got some projects going on. So yeah, that was the show intro track and outro track for today. Nice one, guys.